In 5.
Do that after he's out.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. The very first thing on our agenda is a proclamation for Small Business Saturday, November 25th, 2017. Amanda and Paul, right? I'm from Hagerstown. I didn't know if you knew that or not. You know about it.
I know. Well, there's worse things on here. 6 months? I can handle 6 months.
Okay, Small Business Saturday is coming on November 25th, 2017. The proclamation reads, whereas the city of Hagerstown believes that small businesses are the backbone of our local economy, generating jobs and improving the quality of life for citizens. And whereas the city of Hagerstown supports the efforts of local businesses and recognizes the critical role they play in our community to create jobs, boost our local economy, and preserve our neighborhoods. And whereas a Small Business Saturday is a nationwide campaign to cultivate business for merchants of small businesses on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. And whereas Small Business Saturday will stimulate economic growth locally for merchants by following the tradition of Black Friday and Cyber Monday, two of the busiest shopping days of the year. And whereas residents of our community and communities across the country are being asked to support small businesses and merchants on Small Business Saturday and throughout the year. Now, therefore, with the support of the City Council, I, Robert E. Brucci II, Mayor of the City of Hagerstown, Maryland, do hereby recognize Saturday, November 25th, 2017 as Small Business Saturday, and encourage residents to recognize and support small businesses within our community by shopping at these establishments on the Saturday following Thanksgiving.
All right.
And that's for you.
Thank
Want to say a few words?
Absolutely. I don't know where that hangs. So, Mr. Mayor and council members and Madam Administrator, thank you on behalf of the Chamber and of small businesses here in Hagerstown and Washington County. Probably 95% of our members are small businesses under 50. And then as we talked about the new term, the micro business, 1 or 2 people that work out of their homes. And it is the backbone of our community and backbone of our community, that's right, and really of our country. They do a lot of work as far as innovation, job growth, and as they grow, then obviously they impact our economy more. So on behalf of the Chamber and the business community, thank you. This is great, and it's always fun the day after Thanksgiving to do shopping, which I don't do. I go in the evening. So for those of you who go during the day, good luck.
I don't have much to add beyond what Paul just said, but I do encourage everyone to go out and shop small on Saturday, so thank you.
All right, next up is the Washington County Coalition request, Paul Fry, and from the Washington County Chamber of Commerce, and whoever else is here. See Mr. Kirchable.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. And after we got together last time, I did actually see Jim. I left here, and Jim is still in his office. We chatted about the coalition and some of your questions about the mental health clinic. And so I brought Jim along, and he's got some more information. And if there's other questions about this, then we can address them as well.
And I brought with me Rick Rock. Rick is our director of our Mental Health Authority, our core service agency in the community. Rick's really the expert on a lot of those issues. It was his organization that put in the funding request for the crisis center and for the crisis response team. Also here today, just as backup in case we had any other extended questions when it got into the addictions issue, we have Earl and we have
Vicki Sterling.
Vicki Sterling.
She's the local addiction authority here through the Washington County Health Department.
Of course, Earl Stoner is head of our health department, but they're experts on the other field. So we got all the experts in the room if you have any questions. We also sent over some answers that we kind of took from last a couple weeks ago, your video of looking for some of the questions you might have and try to answer whatever you had. So we'll just open it up. If you had any other questions or concerns, we're happy to talk to you about those.
I think that our questions, if I recall from our discussion correctly, really were twofold. The first is that the way that it was worded within the coalition document of sort of suggested items that was going to be put forth was that it was one specifically to address mental health treatment. And so there was some concern as to what broad scale of measure that included, because there was certainly conversation then about the effort being to address the opioid and the addictions-oriented issues, which are, not, exactly the same. And then the second was there was two pieces to this sort of legislative request. The first being a response framework for crisis situations, but then the second being the 24/7 walk-in clinical service. And it was pretty vague what exactly that means. And I don't have to tell you guys sitting here that for the city, that often means that those types of facilities are located right in downtown Hagerstown, where everybody within the region seems to think that's where everything should be put. And so I can just tell you, as one council member sitting here, I'm not going to support a request like that does exactly that thing, only for folks to then come back and say, well, you supported it. And so without those types of details, I would have a hard time as one of the coalition supporters and one of the coalition financiers of supporting that initiative without understanding the dynamics of what it means as it applies to those two questions.
Sure. And Rick, please interrupt me here in regard to that. Just a couple of things. Let me give you a little quick history. In talking to Rick, we were asking, we specifically were focused on some mental health issues. There were some things in the news, and I serve on the Mental Health Center Board, so I'm aware of some of those challenges. And in that realm, when we were looking at our agenda, we had a couple major projects, but a lot of times we like to put in some other things as well that have to do with more policy issues. So we reached out to the mental health community, and Rick is the main person there, spokesperson we talked to, and we said, Rick, is there some legislative things or some things we need to help do a better job at providing mental health treatment in the community? That's when Rick brought up that they had put in a request for some funding. Apparently there was a consultant study that was done just a little bit ago, and I think it came back in November, but it was looking at the counties across the state and looking at what basic services seem to have the best practices, what every county should have a minimum of. In doing that research, what came back from that was that each county should have at least a crisis team, a mental health crisis team, and a 24-hour clinic where people can get immediate treatment. You have, of course, the health department, or the Meritus and the emergency department that also provide that when you have issues. But typically, to get admitted, you have to be at a level where you're a danger to yourself, danger to others. And if you still have challenges and the police or the sheriff's department drop you in and get the treatment, and you're not admitted, you go back out on the street. Sometimes if you still don't address some of the other issues, that can escalate to the point where it does get to where you have challenges, and then the Chief Brito's office or Sheriff Mullinger's office is back out at the scenes dealing with the same issue over again. So a few years back, there was some money given to each county. Frederick County was one of the ones that put in a 24-hour clinic as well as a crisis team, and they found out that provided a lot of success. So I think there was some feedback from Frederick County and maybe a couple others that had that, where it showed that those are some basic services that every county should have. I think what the state is looking at is trying to make sure every county has at least a minimum level of services to handle these issues. So that's what prompted the request. As far as where the addictions issue comes in, those two things kind of are related. Typically, when you have people that have the challenge, mental health challenges, a lot of times they're codependent on drugs or alcohol. So a lot of times you can't really separate one from the other. Sometimes it's just a mental health issue. Sometimes it's just an addiction issue, and often it's a combination of both. At the same time, our county has a local addictions authority that was put in place as part of a statewide effort to handle the opioid addiction issue. And Earl's, that's all under Earl's department with the health department, so they lead that issue. They have a crisis team as well that they're putting together, and there also could be a need for a 24/7 clinic. So since we had our initial conversation, I know Rick and Earl have been talking about, is there a way to jointly do some of both issues at the same time? Is there a reason there to look at that? But those decisions haven't really been made. That's down the road. I think, when Rick put in his request to the state for money for an addictions crisis, or a mental health crisis team and a 24/7 clinic, we were talking mental health. Now we're kind of talking, everybody's in the state's talking a little bit of both. As far as the location, Kristen, I could say the city probably wouldn't be the only organization or partner that wouldn't want to see more things in the core, in the areas that we're putting investment. I mean, one of our projects, of course, is the Urban Improvement Project. I think a lot of us share those same concerns. After seeing those comments last week, I did bring that up to Rick to talk to him about that. And Rick said, they would certainly want to work with the community as far as where's the right location for that would be suitable if one got in place. But they haven't got to the point where they're talking about a location where it would be. I mean, right now, they're just seeing if they could get the funding for it, and then those conversations would happen.
Where is
And I
Frederick?
think one of the answers to that could be, Jim, with a lot of things, it's very difficult at this stage of the game to say where the optimal place would be. However, it's not very difficult to say where the place should not be.
Right.
So I don't think it's a far cry to make part of that request in there indicating that it is understood that that facility would not be located within the urban core of downtown Hagerstown.
And again, Rick, please chime in here, but part of, probably what they would have to do if they do receive the money is do a request for proposal to try to figure out where that service would be and put that out there. When you're putting your RFP together, you could put criteria in place that kind of, say, here's what we're looking for, here's the areas we're looking for, here's what we're trying to do, the hours, that sort of thing. And then put that out for bid, so to speak, and see what kind of, responses you get. But I know when it comes to locations and, like you said, areas that we want to try to avoid, to try to find the right balance between treating people with needs, but at the same time, taking care of the investments and what we're trying to do as far as revitalization of our core, that could be handled through an RFP process by the guidelines. Rick, you have more you could throw
Where
in?
is Frederick County's
No, I
clinic?
don't know that.
It's on Shoals Lane. Or on Jefferson Street by Shoals Lane, out by Rugged Warehouse, 7-Eleven, right off 15.
You're off 340.
It's where the old substance abuse used to be. It's like right behind it. They built a new building.
Well, I'm not certain that it really matters so much where Frederick's is. Here's why I say this. When you look at just the demographic differences between Hagerstown, downtown Hagerstown, and downtown Frederick, they are astronomically different. We have a minimum 4 times the amount of subsidized housing, at least twice the poverty level. We have 2 to 3 times as many seniors. And I mean, and anybody's welcome to this sheet they want. This compares us to our neighboring jurisdictions, and we are by far well above any other jurisdiction, and in a number of these demographic measurements, more than all of those other neighboring jurisdictions combined, impacted by what I'll call social service-oriented need. In fact, if you take a look at this map, which is staff put together, you see those green and red dots, that's 30 locations that provide what I'll call competitive service-oriented service needs just within like an 8 square block area of downtown. So this notion that folks often have of, Hagerstown needs more of this stuff, I got to tell you, as a resident of Hagerstown, as one, has to sit at this table, we're well served. We're well beyond served at this point. All I'm sort of looking for is to ensure that that we get a better handle on what we have here, and that we better manage within that industry, which is exactly what it is, an industry of service, what we have here among all of these different groups and entities and agencies before we add something more to Hagerstown. That's where I sort of stand on
And
that
just,
issue.
just to be clear where the coalition is, I mean, from the coalition standpoint, we're looking to, if we get feedback, from the community on what are issues that we want for the countywide that everybody agrees on, we add them to the list. If this isn't something one of the partners agrees on, we want to get that feedback. I mean, I wish we got the feedback a month or so ago, but, it's not too late to make those
I
changes.
don't know what we're agreeing to, though.
So, I mean, if you don't want, if that's a service that you don't feel that you want to get behind and support as far as our lobby coalition for money, that doesn't mean Rick doesn't go out and ask for it, and Earl, doesn't go out and ask for it just like the
I
others.
suspect, knowing who's in this room, that the issue isn't whether we support a 24-hour clinic.
Okay, it's just about
The issue
location.
is location.
And
The
that's,
Would that be correct,
construct of
Emily?
it,
Yeah.
how it functions, how it operates. I mean, let's be real honest, I just talked to a gentleman this week who owns an establishment right next to the Wells House, actually 2 of the Wells houses, and he expressed to me his concerns as a business owner, and the incidents that he incurs and deals with and has to address on a weekly basis, on a daily basis with that level of activity. And so for me, in part, it's the construct of it, i.e. the accountability of that operation as it unfolds and occurs to ensure that the impact that that's having isn't, in addition to having a deleterious impact to those surrounding neighborhood. And that, I think, for me, is sort of the biggest issue, is you can't go on a street, on a block, in downtown Hagerstown, in the greater urban core area, and not have some type of level of service-oriented item or property occurring and having an impact within that immediate neighboring area. And I just think that it's well past time that we say, and I say this to Emily all the time, we need it, but we need to make sure that it's functioning as a cohesive, chain of units. And right now, I just feel like it's sort of, every entity and agency for itself and growing as big as it can possibly, sustain its demand for, and I don't think that just doing another one of those somewhere is helpful.
Candidly, to me, and this is way beyond where we're at now, but when I think about it, it just seems to make so much sense to have it in conjunction with Meritus. But that's, like I say, that's a long way off. But when I think about what the objectives are and what the theory is, it seems to me the one place that you don't have the issues that Kristen is concerned with is areas that are set up for medicine. Currently, right now, whether it's in mental health or otherwise, the very people that are going to the emergency room right now could be going into the clinic first, right there on scene, and the ones that need to get into the hospital are right there, and the ones that don't are right there. That type of thing makes so much more sense to me. And Jim, I have faith in what you're saying, because I can't conceive that we would want a 24-hour clinic downtown. And I would note that Jefferson Street and 15 is nowhere near downtown Frederick. I mean, that's not remotely downtown
right,
Frederick.
I mean, I think probably a lot of the partners in the coalition feel the same way. It's on that side. You know, we were just saying if the request had been made for funding, that was a good one, that when we were down there, we could say yes.
And you have a majority on this council that wish to have, to my knowledge, I think, I know there's two of us here.
Oh, I absolutely support it.
We're
Sure,
so
that
far
comes as no
behind
surprise.
in this county, it's
Well, we are
disgraceful.
behind. I agree with you, Lou. You make a good point. And that's what we've been trying to do, is to address the social issues that we have in this community by working with the police. The police have been inundated with calls around that kind of social management instead of the law enforcement activities that they're really trained and responsible to do. So through that crisis teaming that we have, the mental health side, Vicky's put together the CORDS program around overdose for the individual and the family to have a crisis response to that kind of situation. And what we're trying to do is to look at making it more of a preventive activity than to always being on the emergency, the deep end side of things, you know. So the more we can get out, do the crisis work, we forego the multiple times that the police may go back to the same address around the same kind of behavior or concern. So in looking at the crisis literature, crisis intervention literature, Jim was saying there's a continuum of services that are inherent to a functioning crisis system, and we really don't have that here. You know, it really falls to the police at this point, and if we can become more proactive by developing these crisis teams to go out when the situation's occurring, help to get somebody linked into treatment so that it doesn't necessitate those repeat calls, then that's the proactive model that we should pursue. However, at this point, Meredith's emergency department, emergency room is the only option that the police have to take somebody to. And that often is not the most productive outcome for the individual. So in a 24/7 clinic, and I agree with you, Chris, and it doesn't have to be in the downtown corridor, but there has to be some accessibility to transportation, and that could be foot walking, you know, but there has to be that access to that individual to get where they need to be to, you know, prevent that kind of emergency or critical sort of incident from occurring. So all the literature supports that two of the most rudimentary elements of a crisis system are crisis teams going out in the community to respond to individuals at that time of crisis when they're most accepting of treatment and intervention, and then also to have a 24/7 clinic. And, you know, truthfully, in the activity level that we have in this community may not support a 24/7 clinic. And we could probably do some contracting with existing providers to meet some of that need, to offer some walk-in times, you know, that kind of thing. So there are a lot of things that we can do with the model so that it really benefits the system and people in our community. So as Jim said, you know, if anything would come of this, we'd have to RFP it. I'd certainly work with somebody who won the award to get it in the most place practical for individuals. And, you know, I'm not sold on the downtown being the place for that, but I'd like to be able to get it to a point where people can access it when they need it.
I think it's important to point out too how severe it is around here. There was recently an article in Herald Mail that gentleman, I think it was Chambersburg, did an armed robbery of $5 because he needed mental health services, and he knew if he robbed the store that he would get it. I mean, that was printed, and it's terrifying that someone would go to that measure to get that type of treatment. And I think your email had the level of calls that our police officers have run. It was in the hundreds. I don't remember. I don't have it in front of me, but I mean that's a large volume of calls. I think when you put it in a perspective like that, you see how important the need is. I mean, it's clearly there, that it's already happening, and there's nowhere to go.
You know, not to go way back, but we're really at a point that, as a result of the deinstitutionalization process that happened, you know, 30, 40 years ago, and the community supports weren't in place to really work with people and who were placed out of the hospital. Currently, you can't get people into state inpatient facilities because all the beds are taken up with people who have a forensic or criminal history. And unfortunately, you know, I've told parents, arrest your son so that you can get them into jail and they can be assessed there and determined to be incompetent to stand trial or to have some kind of legal assistance to get them into a process where they can get mental health care.
Hey, Marshall, can you let us know how many mental health hospitals there are in the state outside of the Department of Public Safety hospitals, like Clifton Perkins,
Okay.
including Clifton
Yeah, like state
Perkins?
inpatient facilities, Spine and Center.
Right.
Springfield, Spring Grove. I can find that out.
There's not many though,
There's
right?
not many. There are 3 that are, maybe 5. Adventist, Brookline is 1, Shepherd Pratt. There might be 3, 4, 5 hospitals that are like in the private public sector that function outside of the state inpatient facilities. You know, so you can't get people into hospital beds for a long-term treatment. I have a situation where a resident is in a foster care situation that we partially fund. The care provider pepper sprayed him because she was afraid of him. And I can't get that guy into a long-term treatment facility, which is what he truly needs. So, you know, we run the risk of having that situation escalate where the care provider gets hurt, charges are pressed against the individual, and then consequently he gets into some kind of treatment intervention where he may be able to get help, but he's got a criminal charge and probably a not criminally responsible tag placed on him. So to be able to treat him in the community in a walk-in clinic, have a crisis response team respond to that kind of a situation, makes a whole lot more sense than it is to just continually, you know, put our head in the sand in some way and say, well, you know, we'll wait and treat that at a later point when it becomes very critical.
And I do want to bring up the one point that a walk-in clinic is to handle things right away. I mean, that's the walk-in part, but they still will eventually connect them to existing service providers. I mean, that's the long-term goal if they need service. It's not that this would be a new facility provides long-term service, outpatient service. It's, can that somebody find help right away when it usually takes, you know, days, weeks, or even longer, depending on where you could get in and what your needs are, and get some treatment right away, get on a course of action, have somebody that directs you to, connects you to the other service providers where you could get, you know, a continuum of care.
And that's much more important in people with substance use issues. If people come and they ask for help, you have to respond then. You have to hit when that window is open, or the opportunity may pass by and, you know, they continue to go back to whatever they were doing before, resulting in some kind of illegal activity or harm to themselves. So the community has to be more responsive than what we are at this point to the needs that are being presented.
I mean, I think the value of having this conversation now, you know, appreciate you guys bringing up the questions last week, is it does connect, you know, some of the issues that the city has when they're trying to balance investment, revitalization, quality of life with the needs that the clients have in regard to mental health and addictions issues. So, I mean, I know Earl and Rick were planning to have that conversation with the city anyway beforehand, but it's probably better off that, you know, a lot of these issues got put on the table now. That helps them plan more. And, you know, again, that doesn't mean what the funding is going to be provided for this, but based on the feedback, I think the state agency that put everything together wants to go and try to find the funding to coordinate getting these basic services in all the counties around the state, the various ones. So hopefully some money will become available and we could have those, you know, the challenge of figuring out where is the right location down the road and how to best utilize the shared resources for addictions issues as well as mental health treatment.
And I can tell you too, today I was on a phone call with Behavioral Health Advisory Council, which was charged to develop the strategic plan for the state around crisis work to be reported to the legislature for this upcoming session. So that plan was accepted today. I'll find out if I can distribute that out. Maybe, you know, you'd all be willing to look at it and see what the state plan is and what direction they're heading and how that trickles down maybe to the local jurisdictions.
Let me Let me just say this, and I think that Paul conveyed this same sentiment at our discussion, is that we didn't have a huge concern with the first half of this equation, which is, response. But, you talk about we need to have a better mechanism of response for what we're presented with. I'm fine with that when we start having a real conversation, and I say this wholeheartedly as a city resident, with the creation of what we're being presented with. And what I mean by that is it's hard for me as a resident of the city of Hagerstown to sit here and know flat out that you have what I will call less than appropriately organized, less than medically structured entities that are growing, frankly, their business of providing these services on a regional, on a statewide, on a quad state business plan, and use Hagerstown as the location of that base, which then, like it or not, ends up creating what we're presented with responding to. That's happening. That is definitely happening. That entities bring in individuals, become part of that system of service need.
Okay, I understand.
And that process of now accounting for providing exactly the service which is necessary grows. And every time a new entity opens up shop, it grows a little more. And every time an entity expands to a broader network of bringing individuals in, it expands a little more. And that's happening. And that's not happening at one or two places. That's happening at literally dozens of places in this community and largely in our urban core. And we're not talking about what is the ability for us to appropriately and sustainably be able to manage that level of need demand. We're just not. And so it's great, you set up, you have an interest in setting up sort of this crisis response and this clinic for sort of what I'll call the back end of it, but nobody's having a conversation about the impact that the front end of that process is having, and the what I'll call the absence of the interlinking of those chains from what I'll call start point A and what is now presented here as sort of end point Z, and so for me that has to be part of the discussion.
Okay, I agree with you. It is a business, like you said earlier, but the demand is there as well,
It's there for as far as you want to reach for it, sure.
Mm-hmm.
As far and wide in this state and this this four-state area you want to reach for it, it's certainly there.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jim, but I think part of the issue is that with mental health, people who are chronically mentally ill with some biophysical issue, it's very different from what I think mental health has become in some ways, which is to cure the ills of society. It's taken on a much bigger grasp than it maybe was intended to do. We have the failure of parental discipline, the failure of families, those kinds of things that really were the basis of people's stability in a lot of ways, Our society's become less stable, and so consequently, we fall back on these agencies, entities to sort of step in and to fulfill those roles. And I'm not sure that's right. I agree with you. Somebody has to maybe look at what that means, but if it's not there, what does it mean too? Do you know?
I think it should be there. It should be there to the maximum degree we can accountably make it so. And I think that's part of the component that's missing. Is we don't ever sit down and measure, you know, what is the level this city can handle? Bester Elementary School District, prime example, 11% home ownership in that district, more than 50% poverty. But we don't sit down and ask, what are the quantification of you know, service level needs that neighborhood can sustain? Nobody asks those questions. They simply set up shop or expand a service and say, well, we can put it there.
May I interject for a second? Because I don't want to minimize the importance of this discussion, because it is important, and I'm a city resident too, so I get it. And I don't want to simplify this process. Would it be helpful if this was taken out of this coalition piece? Not to stop the conversation, because I think it's an important conversation, and I serve on a number of other committees and boards too. But would it be helpful to take this piece out for the coalition to get your support? And if it is, we're not going to drop it. And I'm not speaking on behalf of the coalition. I'm asking a question for the conversation. And if that's the case, I mean, you know, I don't think it's doable. And if something that's a sticking point for the coalition piece to move forward, and not to stop this conversation, I think it's a different conversation, and also an important conversation.
Yeah, I mean,
It's very frustrating for us sitting here with 3 members of a 5-person council. That's a very frustrating thing, you know.
I support it as is.
Well, and it's frustrating because the whole thing talked about mental health, and we're clearly talking about a broader subject, and it clearly doesn't talk about where this service delivery is going to occur, what entities it's going to be interlinked with. And without knowing that, again, as sort of, you know.
And I'm personally arguing with you. I understand the point. I'm trying to get us to the coalition piece.
Right.
And if we need to take it out, we, you know, again, I'm not the only person. We're kind of the managing partner, but we have a board too. If that's what we're requesting, we can have that conversation if that's the issue. And then again, circle back, because this is also, the other issue is important. And again, I serve on other committees that we talk about it, so.
yeah, again, back to coalition end, I mean, every partner has the veto power. I mean, it's not meant to be that, but it's meant to say, if it's an issue that's not jointly, you know, unanimous, then it could still be lobbied and advocated for, that's fine, you know, within each individual group. But the coalition's just gonna take on items that everybody, you know, is okay with. For us, again, good conversation about mental health, and as somebody that's involved on one of those boards and things, I'd love to hear it.
We're not tonight, there's a majority of the council who wants it on.
Yeah.
That's the only answer I have.
And the other question, as my recollection when I visited here a couple weeks ago, was, are we asking for money? So the coalition, my understanding, isn't asking for money. We're supporting, if we do, we're supporting the request, if there's money out there to be had, to be a recipient. We're not out there advocating to get the money. We're not begging for the money, but if the money's there and the coalition can help support that, if we think it's the right thing to do, then we'll be an advocate for that. That's my understanding.
Yeah, Rick submitted a request of what he felt the funding would be needed for us to do something for the ground floor up, and we just said we would
My
help
recollection,
pass
there
our
were
support for
2
that.
other issues. One was, did Boonesborough make a financial commitment?
They did.
Good. And I'm hoping the county also did?
And while I never bet, and I don't like to overpromise, all the talk is the commissioner's supportive of this, we're gonna move forward,
Good.
and we're meeting them for them early next month. Yeah.
And Lou, on the Boonesborough issue too, that item was brought to us by the CVB, who is a
That's
big part.
okay.
So,
And
you know, but I know we had the Boonesborough Council, a couple of their former council members, and I think some are still current, but there was a little change over there. I know originally the first group came to a couple meetings. They came last year just to get an idea what it was like.
No, it's right.
I thought they were gonna support
Kristen
it.
had brought it up because
Yep.
we saw one thing that was exclusive for Boonesborough, and it's like, are they gonna be a partner in this, or, so that's very positive.
I mean,
thing
that
to
was,
hear.
that was a
That's very
CVB
good.
issue, which they've been
Understood.
a long time
Understood.
paying member that wanted to put that in.
Rick, I only have one question. You mentioned there's probably only 5 institutions currently that accept non-criminal people with mental issues. You named off a couple. Pratt, and a couple others. Having a clinic, 24/7 clinic here, how does that benefit if you can't get people in those 5 institutions anyway?
What benefits in that you have if you can't get people into hospitals, you have to treat them in the community. And if there are serious issues that people are out there dragging around with them on a day-to-day basis and aren't receiving assistance, they could use the clinic as a way to get into sort of, get some immediate assistance.
Some sort of treatment that would help them with their,
Correct.
whatever issue it is that they currently
Right.
have.
Linkage to an ongoing provider in the community, could start, an initial trial of medication and carry them over till they could get in to see a regular, an ongoing relationship with a prescriber, so it really would be a short-term assistance to try and get longer-term care in the community outside of the hospital system.
And a location that's within foot traffic could be even a portion of the current Washington County Health Department or something similar.
Like,
That isn't in the core of the city of Hagerstown, but it is within walking distance to get, and people can beat feet there as
Yeah.
opposed to
Yes,
have to figure out how to get to Meredith or whatever.
that would make sense, yeah.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you have 2 of the majority of 3 who say, keep this in your grand scheme of what the coalition is fighting for, so.
Right. And any other questions you have with the coalition? We certainly appreciate the support. Valerie, Jill, all them were active members of the panel. We appreciate them coming in and giving us their feedback as well. And keep in mind that we try to get the agenda together because we're more effective if we have everything planned. I know Aaron helps with the design and Eric helped with the design of our booklet. And we're trying to keep them from having to work over the holidays to get that put together, so it's ready by January. But that doesn't mean it's not a fluid document. If issues come up and new things arise, we could always bring them and use the coalition's effort to take advantage of the lobbyists that we'll have down in Annapolis working 24/7 for us for those 3 months, pretty heavy, and then really year-round. So, keep that in mind. If something else comes forward, it doesn't mean that it ever closes completely. We just try to get everything done ahead of time so we could have all of our ducks in a row, so we're ready to roll when the session comes.
Just put an insert in the booklet.
Yeah, we'll figure something out. And please come to the reception and come down for the day. I mean, we certainly like having everybody. I know all of you, I think, have been there at one point somewhere along the way, and it's always great to have our partners there involved and learning how that system works. We really have made an impact. One of the big parts of the coalition isn't just the agenda items, it's trying to create a brand and educate Annapolis on really what Washington County and Hagerstown is all about and what were the good things that are going on up here as well. And we have had really positive responses over the last decade that we've done this. As far as we got our act together, it's great that, you guys are coming down in unison. That makes things go a lot better. It's been a real success in trying to bringing up some of the big heavy hitters and committees, which we've seen come up and visit, particularly the last 12 months. We've had several large, important committee groups that have come up and visited what's going on with the UIP, and that's been a real benefit as well. So, again, appreciate the city's support along the way, and Valerie and Eric and Aaron in particular, who will do a lot here coming up.
And the visibility when the folks who don't normally visit us, they put names to faces. I think it also is helpful too, so.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys,
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
evening.
Good Thanksgiving.
All right, next up, we're gonna blow through this preliminary agenda review. I'll call it to order. I'll also give the invocation. We have the pledge of the flag. We'll have announcements. Meeting dates in December are the 5th, 12th, at 5th and 12th are work sessions at 4 p.m. 19th is a regular session at 7 p.m. There's no meeting on the 26th. Then we've added Gridiron MVP Awards before citizen comments. Then we're going to have a public hearing, Land Management Code text amendments. Then we're going to have city administrator comments, Grand Council comments, and we'll adopt the minutes of October 3rd, 10th, 17th, and 24th. And on the consent agenda, stop me if you need to. Under Parks and Engineering, 2018 and 19 pavement preservation list. Under B is Police, downtown fiber loops material, Fiber Plus, Jessup, Maryland, for $18,914. And Signal Sign Arm and Vehicle Systems, Exxon Enterprise Incorporated, Scottsdale, Arizona, $28,834.92. Under Public Works, we have bulk diesel fuel, IPC USA Incorporated, Columbia, Maryland, for $199,730, or 1.6468 cents a gallon. Bulk gasoline, Petroleum Traders Corporation, Fort Wayne, Indiana, $259,162, or 1.5628 cents a gallon. Under utilities, underwater, 6-inch Neptune Protectus 2 meters, Core Main, Montrose, Virginia, for $20,400. Also underwater, the R.C. Wilson Plant, Flocculator Rehabilitation, Jim Myers and Sons Incorporated, Charlotte, North Carolina, $43,560. Water and wastewater, bulk chemical purchase, wastewater division, $470,044. These are multiple vendors. The water division is $741,734, and there are also multiple vendors in that. On the wastewater, vehicle replacement unit 512 is a Keystone Ford, Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, for $117,416. And also in the wastewater, Muffin Monster Repair, JWC Environmental, Santa Ana, California, for $19,259. Under unfinished business, termination of contract, we're taking this, putting this back on the tape, taking this off the table under unfinished business. To vote upon is the termination of contracts prohibiting future purchases with Verstandig Broadcasting. Under new business, introduction of an ordinance, land management code text amendments, approval of resolution, approval of First Amendment to the agreement with American Traffic Solutions Incorporated, ATS, extending the contract through December 31st, 2018. Approval of resolution, lease agreement with Buckler Business Services in my court, the Borough Box at 60 West Washington Street. Also adding the permit waiver for the museum.
And the coalition.
And the coalition funding, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then we'll adjourn. Any questions on the preliminary agenda? And there'll be an executive session at 6 p.m. prior to the 7 o'clock regular meeting. As scheduled at this point, anyway.
It could be longer if you have more applicants.
Could be longer if we have more applicants. Currently, we have 12 applicants. So. Any questions? Okay, moving on. Land Management Code text amendment regarding cluster subdivisions.
Good evening. We have scheduled for public hearing next week a proposed small package of amendments to the Land Management Code, Articles 4, which is the zoning ordinance, in Section D, which is our residential zoning districts. It's the provisions associated with cluster subdivisions. We have a housing development that is currently in process. It's a 48-lot townhouse fee simple ownership type development that is affected by this. We're in the current process right now of going through our annual package of amendments. However, we thought that this needed to be separated out and treated individually in order to keep that development on track. What this does is does three things. One, it expands the ability to do a cluster subdivision in more than just the RMOD zoning district to all 4 of our residential zoning districts. This used to be the case until a few years ago when we were making amendments to the ordinance. And we went from a situation where we had all of our lot areas and setbacks were the same regardless of the zoning district, to having graded sizes, lot widths, et cetera, depending on your zoning district. As a result, we thought that there was never going to be anybody wanting to ever do a cluster subdivision in anything other than the RMOD zoning district. We're finding now that that was incorrect. So what we're looking to do is basically back out of a change that we made a few years ago that would now allow cluster subdivisions in all 4 of our residential zoning districts. And this actually makes a lot of sense because cluster subdivisions, they cut down on your stormwater management needs, your infrastructure needs with lengths of streets, et cetera, and does open space. A cluster subdivision is basically where you create a subdivision where your lots are smaller than they would otherwise be required. However, what is reduced off of that minimum lot size is set aside as part of the open space for the subdivision. One thing I want to make very clear is that this does not increase the permitted density in our residential zoning district. It just, rather than creating larger lots throughout a development, you're allowed to compress them, make them smaller, but what you lose in those individual lots, you set aside in open space. This is actually good planning. Also, in doing so, we were looking at this section a bit more holistically, and while these don't directly impact the pending development, we took a look at the use chart as well, or not the use chart, excuse me, the bulk requirements chart, and we believe that there was a need to make them a bit more flexible because the way it's currently written, even though we allow the lots to be smaller, we really don't give much allocation for adjusting the setbacks to correspond to that. So it's not in its current form, it's not a very flexible tool. So in your package, in the memo, the places where things are written in red, those are the proposed amendments. And one of the things that we propose is to reduce some of the setbacks, the lot area provisions, to make the development of cluster subdivisions a bit more flexible. And then there's one additional provision we put in, which addresses a concern of this body. On page 3, just above the chart, this body has expressed some interest or concern about the idea of having multiple houses on bulk lots. And this body has actually given the Staff and Planning Commission direction to look at this issue as a whole, and we are in the process of doing that larger annual package, and we're looking at it in a grander scheme. But in the short term, we thought it would be good to put a provision in here as well that specifically addresses it within a cluster subdivision. So if this is approved, then if somebody does a cluster subdivision, each individual house, townhouse, semi-detached dwelling, two-family dwelling, which would be an exception would be 2 dwelling units on a single lot, they would all need to be on their own individual fee simple lots rather than these bulk lot situations like we found in a recent development that's come before the city. Because that chart got a bit busy on page 4 of the memo, we reprinted it essentially as it would be as adopted to kind of cut down on the clutter, so give you an idea of what the net result would be. And just to give you an idea of a couple of items here. These are housing developments down outside of Frederick in a place called Villages of Urbana. If you noticed, these houses are built, they're 3-story tall, they have very small front yards. A small setback does not necessarily mean negative quality, so we're just pointing this out. And again, if the lots are getting smaller, we need flexibility in design. This is also these are single-family homes in Villages of Urbana as well. Notice how the distance from the front porch to the front sidewalk, it probably isn't more than, to the fence is probably not more than 6 feet, is my guess. Again, another example. So we're just providing you some examples where as long as the development is designed effectively, small setbacks aren't necessarily a bad thing. One thing that we did propose also is reducing the minimum lot width for a townhouse from the current 20, which is our current ordinance requirement in general, that currently holds over into the cluster development. The proposal is to allow townhouses, this is be new townhouse construction, to go down to as narrow as 15 feet. It's not a requirement, but if somebody has a housing model that they think works, in theory, lots could be as narrow as 15 feet in townhouse developments. I provide this photograph. This is, I believe, up in Boston or New York, and this is an old house. I mean, it's not new construction, but I wanted to give you some sense of scale. That townhouse that you see there is 15 feet wide. If the minimum 20-foot minimum lot width as current, townhouse would be roughly another 5 feet of that after there. Figure 7.5, yeah, roughly to that edge of the door. So our current ordinance amendment ordinances require minimum lot width for a townhouse to be roughly from this side of the door to the other side. We're just just allow, again, a little bit more flexibility. It's not a requirement, these are minimum setback requirements, they're not maximums, they're not build-to lines. So those are the three layers of this. But we wanted also to, like I said, we wanted to put in there the provision that you can't do bulk lots in a cluster subdivision, so that'll resolve that issue that I know this body has had concern with, at least as far as cluster subdivisions, and we're gonna look at it more holistically as we go through the larger ordinance-wide package that we do on an annual basis. And we're in the middle of doing that actually right now. We're about 40% of the way through it. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them, but we have this scheduled for a public hearing next week. Okay,
Good job.
thank you.
Actually understood it.
Next up, tiered property tax discussion. I still can't hear you. Yeah, it's on the preliminary agenda. He's just here to make sure that he,
You took your state where
we
you're,
were okay.
you took your paper clip out.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
How are you?
Almost Thanksgiving.
It is. We had had some discussions and some ideas floating around before about different ways to do revenue generation, and one of those ideas was the possibility of a double-tier tax rate. And staff investigated, for one, if we could even do that in the state of Maryland, and two, if there was any of that being done, who was doing it and how they were doing it. We did find that the state does provide the ability to have multi-tier subclasses under real property. How we found that was being done was there are 4 municipalities that are currently doing that in the state of Maryland, 3 in Prince George's County and 1 in Worcester County. That's Pocomoke City. How they do it is 3 of those cities have a multi-tier tax rate, commercial versus residential, based upon the subclass that the state assigns to a particular parcel. Another, Pocomoke City does it by owner-occupied and non-owner occupied parcels. Within a subclass of the assessment and taxation file, we are able to identify parcels that are whatever class they are, whether it be townhouse, residential, condo commercial, condo residential, whether that is an owner or non-owner occupied parcel. So that's how they adjust their tax rate accordingly. It appears that the adjustment that they make is, for example, owner occupied would be the base rate, base residential rate. Non-owner occupied would be increased anywhere from 18% to 25% in the examples that we have in the state right now. So what we did was we took our current tax file and we applied percentages. We kept the residential rate at 94.1, and then we looked at increments of 5%, raising that in 2 situations, commercial versus residential, and owner-occupied versus non-owner occupied. And what we found out was that keeping the residential rate at 94.1, if we looked at owner-occupied versus non-owner occupied, if we went non-owner occupied and we raised the rate 5% to 98.8 cents for all non-owner occupied parcels, that would show a revenue increase of $330,000 and change. That is about what the increase was for each 5%, up to a top rate of 25%, which would be $1.18. If we charged a tax rate of $1.18 for all non-owner occupied parcels, that would bring about $1.6 million in additional revenue.
Keeping in mind, these are.
These
tourists,
are,
the best-
these are unaudited, unofficial numbers, but based upon, the current
17
tax.
assessments,
Yeah,
right.
the current levy.
Right.
Apartments, are classified by SDAT as any building that has has more than 3 units. So 4 or more units in it is deemed an apartment building. Our current assessed value for apartments is $224.2 million. The tax that we received this year at 94.1 is about 2.1 million. Increasing that by 5% is another 105 million for apartment buildings. And it goes to a top rate, if we increase to 25%, it's about $500,000 for just apartment buildings. All in all, owner occupied would not, I didn't do any rate changes for owner occupied, which means I didn't raise it and lower it, just kept it at 94.1. But it's a pretty significant increase, especially, obviously, the higher you go, the more revenue it's gonna generate for non-owner occupieds.
What about the difference in the commercial?
Commercial, if you looked at all
Which would be
commercial, which
buildings,
I included
businesses.
as apartments, residential commercial, which were all non-owner occupied in the tax file, any non-owner occupied residential parcel, commercial condo, commercial res, agriculture, country club, and industrial. Those are all the classes that we have in our tax file. If we raised all of those classes 5% to 98.8 cents, it would be an additional $761,000. The 25% would be $3.87 million if you took all of those classes and raised them. That would keep residential owner occupied, townhouse owner occupied, and residential condo owner occupied level at 94.1. So,
I know you started out the conversation that, you know, that this was sort of an impetus to look for possibilities for revenue enhancement. But when I think of that term, I guess I think in truer forms of revenue enhancement, how to sort of, you know, gain new funding for new services, and, you know, just a straight tax increase. I guess, for me, from sort of the initial thought process of this, when I started to be able to wrap my head around it a little better, is that example that if you own a 6-unit apartment, I think this is the way it works, correct me if I'm wrong, but in most cases, and you have trash service, your trash service is tied to the units that you have for your utility service, right?
right, it's not on the tax
So-
bill, it's on the water bill.
I own a house, I'm putting out trash, I'm putting out one home's worth of trash. You own a 6-unit apartment building, you're putting out 6 apartment building units worth of trash, right? So you're getting a charge of $35 per unit, because you're basically putting out 6 households worth of trash. And we see that, you know, you drive anywhere around the city and see that, you know, that's a physical measure of volume that occurs. We could probably do it on our tipping fees based on, you know, precincts. And so I guess I look at it more in those terms of, right now, as a homeowner, my property's assessed at, you know, $150,000. I'm paying, you know, $2,500 in taxes, about half of that city taxes. And then you got a 6-unit apartment building, and they're assessed at a lower and paying a smaller tax rate, even though they're providing 6 households worth of, you know, living, of service need that the city has to provide for. So I guess, you know, I look at it in those terms more than I do.
More than commercial, you're looking at.
Yeah.
Landlord, because service.
Yeah.
And also, commercial is gonna have the potential of driving commercial away from the city.
Right. That's why we also
Yeah.
looked at owner and non-owner occupied,
And I think 5's too small.
residential.
I think 5% is too small. But I like where you're going with the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 5% increments here to give us a clue of what it is.
Did you have the opportunity to put together the other information I asked you?
As far as each part of town, I've got it all here. I've got listings of each parcel and their subclass that's on the levy. I can just give some examples.
Generalizations, all I'm looking for.
really, when you look at areas of town, as far as the number of units based upon the assessment, it wasn't really that different.
I imagine it's proportionally the same.
Yeah, in fact, the average assessed value for apartments, there are 415 apartments in town. The average assessed value of those apartments is $540,000. That could be, if you were looking in the core for a 4 or more, would not be assessed very much different than on the outskirts. The thing about being in the different north, south, east, west of town is you're not going to have as high a number of units as the farther out you go. They're more like the 2, 3, 4 units. The closer you are to the core, you're gonna have the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 units. So that's gonna end up almost leveling out a comparison of the assessments. And that was pretty much the way it was. I didn't really look at commercial industrial because that's kind of a different animal in itself. But as far as the non-owner occupied, I didn't see where, in generalizing the 4 areas of town and the core, that there ended up being much of a difference because of the type of building that you found in the core versus outside.
But you could diversify it based on size, if you wanted. In other words, you got your owner occupied or 1 or 2 or 3 unit. And then from there, you've got your 4 to 8, and then above 8, you've got a different level of service demand.
Well,
You know what I
right.
mean?
But if you're looking at it from a purely tax standpoint, I can't make that determination. All I can do is based upon what the state gives me.
I got you.
As to whether it's owner or non-owner occupied residential.
You gotta pick one of the classifications.
I have to pick one of those
Yeah.
classifications.
You can't divide the classifications.
I cannot,
Okay.
because there's no way to.
I-
Yeah, there's no way to.
Unless you went down every year and did every single one.
And that would, yeah. And the other thing that probably,
And
they
maybe
might.
that tax increase would pay for the job of doing
Yeah.
it.
That, the thing with these other places that do it in Maryland, Pocomoke has like 1,200 units. We've got 13,757. So that would make, even if we could do that, that would be a pretty daunting task to do.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure, I think looking at it more, the way the services aspect of it is, that certainly makes sense, because what you say is very true. On a purely tax basis, I'm constrained as to what the state
Right.
gives us, as to how we can adjust the billing. But it's, I mean, even owner occupied versus non, it's pretty significant. It's cent and a quarter, cent and a half every 5%.
I'd be interested to see what the lump amount is. I just think that would be a surprising number to folks.
The lump amount. What
In
do you
other
mean by
words,
that?
you have 38 to 40% owner occupied, and you've got 58, 62%
Right.
rental occupied, and if you look at the total tax base that you collect at 20, whatever, 20 couple $1 million, I'd be interested to see the differentiation between which makes up the bulk of that amount.
Well, as far as owner, non-owner go, revenue for owner occupied is about 8.65 million. For non-owner occupied, that was with a 5% increase, I'm sorry. 8.6 for the owner occupied. For the non-owner occupied, about 6.6.
So even though we're only 40%, we're
Yes,
making
We're
up a little
still-
over $2 million more in revenue.
Right.
See what
On
I
the
mean?
owner occupied.
And that,
Yeah,
I guess
that-
that's the point that I've been trying to get to.
Yeah.
You're right,
is-
Kristen, when you said people would be really surprised to hear that figure, you're right, because I.
Right. You got 60% of the people
60-40
living in
paying the
40% of the assessed value,
Right, yeah.
Right.
pretty much.
Yeah.
And that tells you something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've got,
Services.
yeah, we'll just wait for your all's direction on how to move. We can certainly do this systemically.
I'm interested.
Yeah, no, well, we've got to do something for the budget.
I mean, I think that staff would like to have some direction on, do we try to build a budget with this, a tax rate in it? Because again, we talked about last week.
I think you
I have to
should.
build the budget
Yeah,
first.
I mean, you got my full support on a number. I don't even care if you give us you know,
I concur.
increments of 5 to 25 and let us sort of look at it.
I can do that, yeah.
And decide what
concur. I mean,
seems,
I see
know,
no way out
manageable.
of some methodology for
Exactly.
raising revenue.
Exactly.
And so, you know,
That
I'm
will
willing to
help
do it by a
Michelle
general
and I,
tax increase,
yeah.
but this makes more sense to me. I have no problems with this at all.
And we still stay hopeful that assessments are continuing to bump up a little bit, but I don't think they're gonna bump up as
not gonna
fast
see
as
that
we'd like them
until
to, especially in the core.
And you're looking at
19.
more of the tax tier between the owner occupied and the non-owner occupied,
Yes.
okay.
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 It would be nice if, when that happens, when property values finally go back up, we were able to lower the rate on homeowners.
Oh, that would
Yes,
be-
indeed.
Yeah.
Amen, sister.
Yeah.
It's
that-
been done. It's
Yeah.
been done in the past.
Yeah.
I had
Lower
meant
taxes.
to,
she must have bought a
Yeah.
house recently.
Scott, thank you for that very informative presentation. I appreciate that.
Article number 7.
Understandable again, that's too. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank
So,
you, Scott.
now we need the city administrator's comments.
Just wishing everybody a happy Thanksgiving and safe travels for you and your families if you're traveling, and eat a lot of good food. That's all.
That kid Christmas.
Lou?
Happy Thanksgiving, and may I assume, if you're not gonna say it, Bob, or I'm assuming trash day, Thursday is put on to Friday, if you're Thursday, and Friday is.
Just after Thursday, correct, one day after.
Right, one
just
day,
the
one
Thursday
day
people on
pass.
Friday, okay.
Kristen?
I don't have anything.
Done?
No.
Okay. Emily?
I'm just going to shameless self-promote for a second. I wrote an article that's in Herald Mail today, and I would be very appreciative if everyone read it and spread it around.
Ready. Very good.
You got my message, I'm sure.
Yes, thanks.
And you're right.
Thank
I
you.
mean,
Don't spread that around.
Everybody looks for a solution to the problem, it's right in front of them, you wrote it right out.
Just talk about it.
I just hope that when I write mine, they give me the same kind of wordage, you know, that they allow me to be able to write something as long and, so, instead of cutting it out and editing it.
I asked specifically that they include the whole thing, and I was very appreciative
No,
that they did.
Emily was very, it was very well thought out and to the point and truthful editorial, so, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. You know, look forward to, next Friday, the 1st, is tree lighting. So put that on your schedules. Now, I'll say it again Tuesday night next week, but
That's fine.
put that on your schedules for the 1st. There's a tree lighting at City Park, and, well,
The whole city.
yeah.
Yeah, you're
the
getting
City Park
confused
lighting.
with other
City
cities.
Park lighting, yes, yes, not a tree lighting, City
And then
Park lighting.
then that Saturday, December 2nd,
Is
is
Chris-
the
Chris
Chris
Kringle.
Kringle.
Yep, downtown,
and,
yep.
Polyfest.
Yep,
Wow.
so, great things happening,
Back in
come
the Christmas
downtown,
is
go to City Park, do all those kind of fantastic things, and,
Talk about it.
have a very happy and safe Thanksgiving. Take a lot of naps. Thanks. All right, that's it, thanks.